Welcome back to episode 3 of Not a Minimal Viable Podcast. We're here to bring you conversations with the builders, founders, and entrepreneurs who are shipping way more than just MVPs in Toronto's tech ecosystem. Each episode will dive deep into their journeys, from those early minimum viable products to the full-scale solutions they're building today. Today we're joined by a close friend of mine, Sergiy. He is a seasoned front-end developer and entrepreneur based in Toronto, Canada. Currently, he serves as a founding engineer at Actual, focusing on creating seamless user experiences and advancing digital interfaces. Sergiy, welcome. Do you want to maybe take 30 seconds or so to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. You pretty much covered it, but I'm Sergiy. I am in Toronto, originally was born in Ukraine, and through a bunch of experience, I'm here now, and excited for what the future holds.
Before we dive any deeper, do you remember where we first met? I was thinking about it earlier this morning, and I couldn't quite place where it was.
That's a very good question. I was actually thinking about it as well. It would have been 535, maybe one of the earlier ones.
Could be.
But one of the core memories that I have of Rudy is 535, which is a co-working space in Toronto. They host a bunch of events on the east end of Toronto, but I came to one of those events and I remember seeing Rudy sitting outside. There's like a little patio.
I remember that.
Patio chair, and Rudy had his tripod and his camera up, and he was trying to record one of his vlogs. And I've seen you everywhere and anywhere in the space.
I noticed this when we went to one of the co-working things at Shopify, and everybody's like coming over to the desk to say hi to Rudy and being like, yo, I saw you were working on this and you're doing this. And I was like, dude, you have like clout in like the Shopify co-working space or something. Like, people know you here.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I feel like these events are, like, they do so much for the community. And sad that 535 shut down, but yeah.
They didn't.
They didn't?
No, you shouldn't listen to everything you see on Twitter.
Oh, no.
There's probably a few threads recently that were happening, but yes, as far as I know, there is no model coming out of Brampton. And 535 was just doing some renovations. So, I texted Rob Lay, who's one of the co-founders of 535. This is a story that we can probably get into afterwards, but I was like, yo, is 535 shutting down? And he's like, nah, man, we're just doing renos.
It's interesting you mentioned Brampton, because me and Manit were just talking about that.
Yeah, it's very topical right now.
I'm not on Twitter or like most social media right now, so I had no idea what he was talking about. And he was like, yeah, Google's launch for something got a bit overshadowed by something that was happening on Twitter. And I was like, I have no idea. I read about Gemini 2.5 in a newsletter that I read every morning, and not on Twitter. So like, please explain what you were talking about.
I'm honestly so out of it as well. Like, I just know that these guys, Vin and Tommy and all these people, they just put out they were fake beefing with Ivan and Aiden, which is like the CTO and CEO of Cohere on Twitter.
Okay.
And they were like, yeah, we're gonna come out with this new model that's gonna overshadow Cohere's Command A as a joke.
Right.
And they did that, and the tweet blew up. Like, just within an hour, the tweet had like 500 comments already.
Wait, so when you say they did that, they actually created a model, or they pretended?
They pretended. Like,
right.
It blew up. Like, I think currently it's trending on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that there's like a Brampton model.
Yeah, I forget what the actual wording is for the trending, but it's like speculating about this new model called Brampton. And because Twitter algorithm picks up the communication and parses it a certain way.
Okay.
It's a very interesting, like, social experiment and study that, like, Vin and those guys, Tommy, are doing as, like, they're really good at storytelling and narrative. So, like, the new systems concept is, like, very experimental from what I understand. Again, a lot of it is not me directly understanding what is happening, but like the Socratica Symposium, where they did the new line, which was like the shuttle bus from Toronto to Waterloo, is like a random thing that somebody comes up with mid-conversation, being like, wouldn't it be cool if we did a bus to Waterloo to like bring all the people from Toronto and give them an opportunity to go to Waterloo? And I think this was just like another one of an experiment. maybe some ego was at play because of that beef that happened with Cohere. Supposedly, it all started from they had a Counter-Strike tournament at New Stadium, and Ivan beat Vin, and maybe he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. Yeah, Manit, what's the reason for not having Twitter?
Well, I used to be on Twitter for like a really long time, and most of my Twitter used to be like, geopolitics or some financial market stuff, and I was constantly checking it. Like, I was on there all the time. Like, every time I would have 2 seconds to myself, I'd pull out my phone and just like reload my Twitter page. And I thought, this is a bit insane. Like, I'm on here constantly. This is not good for me. So then I just deleted my account. I didn't want to have a way back in. And thankfully now you can't even read tweets if you don't have an account or if you're not signed in. So it's been like a blessing in disguise that way as well. But I mean, yeah, I do feel disconnected from something sometimes. Like Rudy will bring up something and I've never heard of it before, but apparently everyone's talking about it online. And so it's a bit of a trade-off, of course, but I feel largely a lot happier not constantly checking that. But I'm curious about tech Twitter, right? Like you were mentioning storytelling as well. How important has that space become for founders now? Because I don't think a lot of tech people get enough credit for the way they're storytelling and how well they're doing it. So I just want to hear your experience as like a founder, how that space is helping you, or if at all.
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been on Twitter for probably over a decade at this point. And before it was more of like a social, like kind of like trying to stay on top of topics. Their algorithm has come a long way as well. It's sometimes I hate it because some of the like for you stuff that it shows me, I know it's showing me because it like wants me to stay engaged with it, even though it's not like related to some of the interests that I have. So I'm very big on muting words and topics and stuff to make sure that like it cuts through a lot of the noise. But in terms of storytelling, I think Twitter is a place where you can, similar to TikTok, I think, in a way where some content can get a lot of traction without you necessarily having to have a big account with a lot of followers. And as long as you're showing it in the right way, a lot of people will engage with it. And it's been times where people have had viral tweets make their product be more known. And yeah, it's like one of those channels for acquisition that I think like it is a double-edged sword where like there's a lot of crap on Twitter with this, like, for someone that doesn't understand the ins and outs of it, they will look at a tweet that's like Brampton new AI model and think, oh man, is this real? Like I retweeted as a joke. There's this like hexagon test that a lot of these models go through with like front end development, where you have a ball and it's within a rotating hexagon, and you just look at the physics and like how the LLM is able to do it. And Theo, who's a huge influencer, educator, content creator, posted I think it was the new Gemini 2.5 model, how it did it. And then I just retweeted that, quote tweeted that, and pulled out a gif of like a ball rolling with hexagons and like 3D stuff. And I was like, oh man, but Brampton did it better. And then I had people like respond to me like, is this real or not? Show me the code. And I'm like, well, it's kind of a joke, but then you feel bad for like insinuating that things like that can happen. So you have to really be able to gauge which content is real versus not. And again, it's a question within all social media channels now, like was this AI generated or is this a real person? I try to stay as authentic as real as possible. Like for me, it's been very rewarding to put out videos of some of the things that I'm working on and get like early feedback from potential users or just like peers in the industry.
Yeah, just building on top of that, like, you're low key like a tech influencer on Twitter, because you're like partnering with like please correct me here, but like you're partnering with like Warp, Supabase, even I think to build all these cool tools for people to use. What's the inspiration behind that? Because I did notice that you've described yourself as somebody who's building things that hopefully help people. So what inspires you to build and do all these things?
the Warp and Supabase. So let's break it down. Supabase does these launch weeks every once in a while, and I remember seeing an event in Toronto that was like launch week 12 for Supabase, and I joined and I went, and it was in a party room of a condo, and they had this projector and some food and some people that are interested in Supabase, and it was a great experience. And then they posted a tweet saying that they're looking for someone to help host their meetups for launch week 13. And I jumped on top of it right away because I was like, I really enjoyed this event. I had some thoughts in terms of how to make it better. And it was kind of like, timing is a very interesting thing because it sometimes works really well for you and sometimes it works completely against you. And I've seen that within my kind of like life many times over. But I was trying to build a community in Toronto, and still am, of highly technical people talking about interesting technical challenges that they run into day to day. And the reason for that is there's a big community in Toronto specifically for JavaScript called Toronto JS. They have thousands of members, very active. I've been to dozens of their events, but recently the ones that I've been going to, I found that they were not necessarily targeting, but they were like, even the talks and the people that came to them were a lot more entry level. And for me personally, it was just not the kind of content that I wanted to consume or like talk about with people. And so I decided that like I wanted to do something that was more like, I've been doing software development for 15 years now, and like the challenges that I run into isn't how to like build a basic Next.js app. It's like, how do you optimize performance and do proper fetching strategies or like background jobs and things like that. And so I put up an event called Next.js Toronto because Next.js is something that I work with every day. There wasn't anything like that in the city, and I was like, well, why not start it? Mm-hmm. And I was very lucky and privileged to have like people in the community on Twitter share it, and then I got a space to do it at, which is Tempo Labs, which you guys had. Was it Josh from?
Yeah, we had Josh.
Tempo Labs on the podcast. I listen. I'm a big listener.
We have a fan.
So yeah, Kevin and Peter, the founders, are super, super nice, and they were like, hey, here's a space. Because timing worked out as well. They just had opened up an office in Toronto,
right.
And they were like, we want to position ourselves as a community member, so like hosting these events is part of it. So their first event was my first event, and then the second one was the Supabase one, which was very exciting. And now I'm doing, I don't know when this is going to come out, but April 1st, there's going to be another event with Supabase doing their launch week 14. And yeah, so that's kind of like me reaching out to them and doing this collaborative work.
Yeah.
And with Warp, it was very different because I've been a Warp user for a few years now. And again, Twitter, somebody posted, Adam Archer, who started Shopify Builder Sundays, actually, he posted something related to terminals, and I was like, hey, like I use Warp, and this is the thing that it helps me with, because I like to share things that I found valuable, so that other people in the future might run into the same issues. And like I always think about it like, now that I know this stuff, what would help me? And so like that's the approach that I take with some blog posts that I've done in like going back to like 2013, 2014 with Meteor, which was a JavaScript framework that I got to know really well and like really deep. And like I tried to host it on AWS, and it was a mess. And I wrote this blog post, which was pretty popular. Like it got featured in one of the big publications about code stuff. But so I tweeted about Warp, and one of their developers DM'd me being like, hey, thanks for shouting Warp out. Like, I want to send you some swag. And I was like, well, this is freaking awesome. Yeah. Again, like I'm not, to Rudy's, like I'm not an influencer by any means. But they like engaging with people that are brand ambassadors in a way where like if you're a happy user, you want to treat them well, and chances are they'll bring more users to your product. And so they did that, which built a lot of brand loyalty for me with them. And then they have this effort to bring more creators to talk about Warp. And yeah, I've done some content featuring them. Yeah, it just kind of happened serendipitously. I never like, the goal was never let me find people that can pay me or whatever to talk about their stuff. It's like, if I like their product, I'll talk about it and see what happens afterwards. Yeah.
But yeah, this culture of like the knowledge sharing that you were talking about, it like from an outsider perspective, it's not as common in the business community or in the finance world, where the underlying assumption is that if you found a way to do something better, you hold on to it as tightly as you can because that's competitive advantage. But then you go out into the tech world, and especially even at co-working spaces that I've been to with Rudy, I see everyone is going up to other people and you're like, hey, I was building this. I heard you were working on something like this. Do you have advice on how I can improve this, change this? And people are so willing to share. And it's sort of this like community growing together because they can acknowledge that we're not as big as we want to be right now. And this is how we get there, which is like a very like fresh culture perspective, I think, from what I've been exposed to so far on the business side of things. Not to disparage the business community in any way, but I'm just saying that like in today's world, the pace at which products are being shipped and the way the tech community is growing, I think that is the way to go about it. And to hear you talk about your experience with that, I think that's just a testament to how that's been happening.
I think a lot of it comes down to the culture of open source and like that being a core tenant in the tech community. Obviously GitHub hosting a bunch of code that's open source is building a culture of like, just because you know something, that doesn't mean you should not share it with other people. And it's funny because I can see that parallel, and like, I don't know if you saw, but like Mr. Beast's playbook got like leaked at some point and people were like, holy shit, like now I can make billions and literally become Mr. Beast on YouTube. But the fact of the matter is just because you have an idea or you know the rules doesn't mean that you can execute. Like, everything comes down to execution. Seen in business, people, you have the idea guy that's like, I won't share it with you because my idea will make me billions of dollars. Like at some point I was on Hacker News. They have this, so Hacker News is part of Y Combinator. Y Combinator has obviously their startup school or incubator. They also have this co-founder matching platform, kind of like Tinder for co-founders. And I had a profile on there as a technical person, and I got hundreds of submissions of people being the idea guy. And then when we start talking about it, they're like, hey, can you sign an NDA before I talk to you about it? And I just thought that was such a silly concept because they thought they're going to share this idea with me and I'm going to take it and run with it and build it and make billions of dollars off of it. And so, yeah, this concept of openness is something that I definitely share with the developer ecosystem, and it stems from open source, I think, being a key driver. Like, people are worried about their code being stolen and repurposed. A, that already happens all the time. But B, just because you know how it's made doesn't mean you know how to market it, how to acquire users, how to build value, and how to like promote it further. Like Sentry, I don't know if you guys are familiar, they're an error tracking company, and they have this concept that isn't open source, it's fair source, which means, and I might be a little bit wrong here, but all of their code becomes open source 2 years after it was written. So, and the reason they changed that, they used to be open source, but people would just like literally steal their code, spin up a product that's Sentry-esque, but then charge $20 a month rather than $30 a month and try to acquire users that way. And they died very quickly because there's only so far you can go with just undercutting someone. And so Sentry decided to change to this model where they still want to support open source and share kind of the code that they've written and the tools, the methodologies that they use with the world, but make sure that, I guess, there isn't like someone just being like, oh, I can just take it and copy and run with it. It does come down to competitive advantage, obviously, at the end of the day, but not in a way that people make it out to be, where it's like, hold on to your idea for dear life. And yeah, I think that's why I resonate with the tech community, and I appreciate talking to people in this like default to openness sense rather than, oh, I won't tell you this because I know something.
Has it always been like this, or have you seen this sort of like constructive back and forth sort of emerge within the past decade or so?
That's an interesting question. I think there is little pockets of communities that it's always been like that. It's something that I think about with, I've been, you can say I've been in crypto for a while, but not in a way that people think of when you say you've been in crypto. It's like trading meme coins and stuff. Like, I've never found value or interest in like the get rich quick schemes or whatever. And it's a weird paradigm because blockchains by nature are open. Like, you can look up, for example, for Ethereum, any smart contract that's written is on the blockchain, and you can see the code that's written in. And so it's open source, but then you have people that are like, oh, I won't tell you which coin to buy or what to do with this technology or whatever. And so, yeah, it's still prevalent. But because the space is so vast, you find kind of pockets of people that you relate to and align on ideas with or ideologies and kind of stick with them. And so maybe it's a personal reference point where I've seen it become more open, but maybe it's because I've made decisions to put myself in places where openness is important and people share the same kind of ideas and ideology.
But yeah, it's interesting when you were talking about even if you have the recipe, it doesn't mean you're going to be just as successful. Like, my grandma could make one dish and I could try to recreate it. I can promise you it's not going to be anywhere near as good as it. But we're seeing this happen a lot, and I'm curious, like you said, some companies try to recreate it using the open source models and they're not as good. We're seeing it in the finance world and commerce as well. Like, there's a firm called MicroStrategy, which basically has a treasury reserve of Bitcoin, right? And their stock has been like skyrocketing for the past couple of years or so. And there are companies coming up now who are like, essentially their businesses are not doing as great, and as a get out of jail free card, they're like, oh, we just buy up a bunch of Bitcoin and our stock is going to skyrocket. Like, GameStop announced like yesterday or day before that they're doing this now as well. But there are so many material constraints to why Strategy's position actually works and they have upside, whereas all of these other companies are just jumping onto a sinking boat possibly. So trying to recreate something just from the outside because 2 or 3 of the basic elements does not work, right? Are there safeguards to that aside from just your own drive and vision and willingness to make something work that goes into building a product? Are there like safeguards you build into that? Like, even if your code is outside, what are other ways somebody won't be able to recreate what you're building?
So first of all, I don't have any code that is worth copying yet, which I guess is fine. You can go ahead. But yeah, I'm definitely not the right person to speak about successfully having an open source project that is revenue generating to be able to safeguard it. But again, like, I think the biggest thing that I find is like almost like a superpower is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's funny because this comes from Ted Lasso, which is a show on
Great show
on Apple TV, and one of my favorite quotes, and I think like a thing that I'm basing a lot of my decisions on is be curious, not judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
And so people look at something and they see it working, but they don't go the step further to understand why it's working. They just see kind of something on the surface, and they're like, oh, if I just copy this will be the same. But if you really understand what is happening, you could have looked at the past 2 years and how Bitcoin has been doing for the past 2 years and understood that this compounding growth and success is tied to a lot of other factors that go into it, not just because he decided this morning to buy a bunch of Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And companies think that, oh, I can do that and get to the same result. But it's the same with like overnight success and people thinking or like seeing something blow up and thinking that like, oh, you just woke up like that. But in reality, it's years and years of grind and like mistakes made and resiliency and anti-fragility built to get you to the point where you have something that could look like an overnight success, but in reality it really isn't. And I don't think anything could be, apart from like the speculative memes, which you launch a coin and then the next day it's 1000x and then you're done. And like the people that know about it were able to make money on it, but
Yeah.
that's not, to me, a signal of success or
Yeah.
anything like that. And so, yeah, I think people need to just be a little bit more curious and dive deeper into things.
I agree.
Yeah, talking about success. So I've seen from like your past experiences that you've had like a varied career, right? All the way from like Shopify to Coinbase to now founding roles. How has your definition of success evolved throughout this like journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. We can probably take a step all the way back to just kind of a bit of a background on me. So I grew up in the Ukraine. We moved to Canada in 2007. Both my parents have PhDs in aerospace engineering. So education has been a very important part of my life. Growing up, like, and again, it's a byproduct of the place that I lived in. So in Soviet Union, like, if you didn't go to university, you probably went to the army. And a lot of those decisions that my parents and their parents and everyone in our family made were aligned with kind of like survival potentially. Like, I would rather go to school than go to the army. But that ingrained education and knowledge as like an important part of what shapes you as a human being. And when we came to Canada, I was in grade 8 going into grade 9, and English wasn't a language that I spoke. I learned it a little bit, but it's one thing to learn it and another, like, I'm learning Spanish on Duolingo. I went to Barcelona the other week, and hola, mi nombre es Sergio is all I could do, and like order a coffee. But yeah, so it was definitely challenging for the first few years to make friends and just like feel like a part of a community. But I think some of the things that my parents did really right is we moved to like a lot of, especially in Toronto, there's a lot of multicultural areas. Like, you have Little Italy, you have Little Portugal, there's Ukrainian neighborhoods, there's whatever. We moved here, and another quick aside is like, I didn't even expect that we were going to live here. My dad told me that we were coming here for a vacation to visit our relatives, and then once we were here, he was like, hey, we're not going back. And I cried for months because I've built, like, when you're in grade 8, you're building your core friendships, and like, I brought my homework with me here to finish it and stuff. So that was a challenging part of the process of building anti-fragility. But we moved to a neighborhood, and I went to school, and I was put in an ESL program, and it just didn't click with me. Like, I was like, let me just struggle through it, and like, let me go to a school that's like English primarily. And another side effect was the area that we were in, the high school that I would have had to go to. My dad read an article that like someone got stabbed with a machete there. And my dad was like, actually, maybe we'll go to a different school. So he did some research, and he found North Toronto, which was like the 4th most academic school in Canada, or high school in Ontario. I forget what it was, but it was in Yonge and Eglinton neighborhood. And yeah, I went to school with primarily English-speaking people, which, for the sake of learning the language, when you're talking to people that speak it, whichever way they speak it, you tend to mimic it. And so I think a lot of me being able to speak the way that I do now is attributed to formidable, like, early years of me learning it, hearing it the way that it's supposed to sound, I guess. Because I have friends that have lived in Ukrainian neighborhoods for way longer than I have lived in Canada, and they still have an accent, being like, yo, bro, what's good? So that was very helpful. But on the contrary, and again, timing wise, these are 13, 14, 15-year-old kids that already formed their core group, friend groups, and they're not really open to having other people kind of join those. And so I struggled with finding a friend group that I could like relate to. And so it ended up being this like multicolored, like, our school had like, I don't know, 7 to 10 people that were all like from different places. And so that was our like misfits friend group, which was interesting. Through that, I've met other people outside of my high school. When I went to university, I went to University of Toronto. I did 1 year. So this space is not familiar, but the U of T campus is a bit familiar to me.
Don't worry about it. We've been here 4 years. We had no idea this exists.
Which is crazy. But again, I didn't move away to like Waterloo or wherever where you live on res and you see these like movies about college life.
Right.
And it is really true. Like I've seen it firsthand where like you build very strong friendships and very strong communities based on the school that you went to or whatever. But for me, because I lived in Toronto, I didn't live on res, and because we didn't want to spend money on res, because moving to Canada, even though my parents had both PhDs, that's not something that is recognized here, and so they had to kind of start from scratch. And so at the time that I did university, my dad was kind of in and out of jobs, and I decided that, well, it started to get a lot harder with university. Like first year comp sci, I remember doing mathematical reasoning for computer, like algorithms and computer science. And up to that point, I had never studied for a math exam in high school because all the stuff that I got taught in Ukraine kind of carried me from grade 8 to grade 12. So like the stuff that we were doing here in grade 11, I was doing already. Like I was already doing that, which is crazy. School got really hard, and for me, going into more student debt didn't feel like the right choice. Versus this was 2012, 2013, 2014, a lot of startups were coming out, and I was already kind of excited about the space, in big part thanks to my older brother. He's been in the tech world before me, and he kind of steered me into the direction of software engineering early on, so that was definitely grateful for that. And so I dropped out of university to kind of start learning software development. I joined a marketing agency building like WordPress websites for like dental offices and lawyer offices and stuff. Then my brother was working as a developer advocate for this framework called Meteor. So his job was to get more developers to use it. I was an up and coming developer. He got me to learn the framework, and he was able to give me some freelance projects to kind of work with because he knew people that wanted to build projects. From there, I realized that like WordPress development or marketing agency at the time wasn't for me. I was always like trying to figure out, how do I bring the most value out of the things that I do? And again, in university, I looked at the startups that were coming up, and I was mesmerized and excited about the things that you can do at a startup. And so I started looking at startups on AngelList, and one startup I saw was career paths for people that don't have a post-secondary degree. And I was like, well, that's kind of me. I resonate with that. And so the founder, Ryan, and I chatted, and he, for some reason, gave me a shot to join him because his technical co-founder was leaving to go to Shopify, actually, which is funny because I ended up going to Shopify afterwards as well. But yeah, he gave me a shot, and for 4.5 years, we kind of grinded through this project, this concept that when you go to university, you know exactly what you're doing for the 4 years that you're there. You know what courses you're taking, you know what exams you're going to do, and you know what you get at the end of it. But at the time, 50% of people were going to the workforce as their first step after high school, and there wasn't enough tools equipped to make them be successful in that. And so a lot of people looked at entry-level jobs as like, oh, just a part-time gig, or I'm just going to be a coffee barista for the summer or whatever. But in reality, Starbucks, and like we worked with Air Canada and Starbucks, and we saw that like entry-level jobs can lead to very meaningful careers if you stay within the company, because it's a lot easier and cheaper for them to promote someone internally than retrain, rehire someone. And they're losing something in the ranks of like $10,000 per person that leaves within the first 6 months. So it's a huge deal with them with churn, because people aren't given the right tools to understand what this part-time job can actually mean for their career.
Right.
And so that was a project that we worked on, and as passionate as we were about it, it was really apparent that companies weren't ready for not having to require a post-secondary degree on the resume. A lot of companies that we talked to were like, this is just their way to flag someone and like do some sort of screening that like if this person completed school, they must be ready to do customer service jobs, which is such a weird paradigm because the skills that I've learned, I didn't learn in school. And not to say that like no industry needs that. Obviously, there's lawyers and doctors and everything that you need to prove that you can do the things that you can do. But like soft skills are something that is just as important. And yeah, I guess just companies were trying to parse and funnel out people that didn't go to school because that must mean something else. Like that must speak to your character some sort of way. Like, oh, you didn't finish school because you were lazy and you didn't want to work. And so like that's their criteria. But anyway, so we couldn't find product market fit. We pivoted into employer branding tools for job postings because we saw that every single job posting, if you look on Indeed or any job board, they all look the same. You can have two separate job postings for a software engineer, a completely two separate companies, Apple and Airbnb. The requirements are going to look pretty much the same, but what people don't get to know is the company culture and like the perks that you get with it, because companies have their career websites, which are great at talking about all of that, but a lot of users won't actually funnel through the career site to go to the job board. And so they missed a lot of that important context. And so we started building these embeddable widgets that you can put into the job posting that a candidate can interact with. So we get more data around how a candidate is interacting with the job posting to be able to give companies a better gauge of how interested those candidates are in applying for that job. Because again, at the end of the day, a job posting is a target market of one person. You only need one person to apply for that job. But the problem is companies have thousands of applicants applying, and it's probably even worse now with AI tools and automations that can just fire off 10,000 resumes, and they can be highly targeted. And like with the tools that we have now, you can write a very compelling CV letter with AI, and it makes it a lot harder for companies. And so companies start building AI tools to sift through those applications, and now you have AI applications with AI companies, and interviews are done with AI videos now, and candidates are, it's an interesting space, and I haven't explored it in over probably 10 years now. But anyway, so we were building those tools, and again, we were able to sell contracts to Siemens and Johnson & Johnson. So, and again, this is just two of us.
Yeah.
And I'm the only software developer. And it was at the time felt like a very successful thing. Like, holy shit, we've signed a $60K contract for the year. But when you only have two of those and you have to pay yourself, that's a challenge. And so again, that was a very, very formidable and like instrumental part of my career journey. But a lot of lessons learned, and like some would consider, I at the time considered it a success. I still consider it a success, but for someone else it could look like a failure because we didn't 10x or 100x or whatever. And so what I did after was look at like, what's a successful company? And being from Toronto, and I went to a couple of I went to like a Y Combinator event. I think it was at Waterloo or somewhere, but Shopify had their booth there, and I just kept hearing Shopify is a great company to work at. And I had met someone that worked at Shopify, and so I got a referral, but still went through the interview process. Again, Shopify didn't care that I didn't have a post-secondary degree. I had the technical chops and was able to get a job there. At the time, I guess that also could look like something of a success. Like a lot of people will join a company like that and then work for however long there and ride out the yearly promotions, the yearly pay bumps, and feel like they've gotten successful in that sense. But for me, something was always kind of like in the back of my mind. I have this restlessness about myself where I want to make sure that I give my parents the things that they were able to give me, which is freedom, and like the life that I have now is hugely due to that. And so making sure that, again, my mom was a university professor back home. She can't really do that here because she would have to go through education and schooling and prove that she can do that. And language is obviously a huge barrier as well for older generations. When you live your whole life in a country and then you move to a different country with a different language, it's a lot harder to learn that language. And so I have this innate desire to build something successful, not just for myself, but like for my family and for generations that come after me, to make sure that money isn't something that we have to worry about. And I could look at it as I can just stick at Shopify, 5-10 years, stock accumulates, compound interest is a thing, and I was probably dumb at the time as well. And I was like, no, I want to do something faster. And so it was around 2021 where NFTs and everything in crypto was blowing up for whichever crypto cycle that was. Yeah. I looked at NFT projects, and again, the thing that captured me wasn't people are making a shit ton of money about NFTs. It was the blockchain technology, which is this like open source, borderless way to transact on the internet. Timing kind of worked out again, where I had a recruiter from Coinbase reach out to me. They were like, hey, we're building this NFT marketplace. And that completely aligned with kind of the things that I was curious about at the time. And I didn't want to jump into a startup because I was still kind of scarred in a way from the first startup. I was like, well, and crypto startups were so sketchy at the time too. And so I was like, I'm jumping in, and they pitched it as like, oh, this is going to be a startup within a big organization. And I was like, oh, kind of like perfect case of both were like the best of both worlds, where it's a successful company that's publicly traded and they're building this mini project that they're looking at as a startup. So things will move fast, and like I like that kind of environment. So I joined, but then 6 months later, NFT market kind of crashed, and we weren't able to compete with OpenSea and corporate company. They were like, hey, this is not the right investment for us, so let's just shut it down or like put it on life support. And I got reorganized into a different team, which was great, but not something that I signed up for, and stuck it out for a couple of years. And then the exciting opportunity that came about was again on Twitter. Somebody tweeted that they are joining Paradigm, which is a VC fund in San Francisco, and they're looking for software engineers. And this was now post-COVID.
Okay.
I moved back in with my parents to help with their mortgage, and just kind of like didn't make sense to live in Toronto's renting while we're in lockdown and I can't go to the office and do whatever. So I started to get antsy to not live with my parents anymore again. And this was an in-person opportunity in San Francisco. I was like, oh, that's really cool. This is a VC fund that invests in startups. So I was like, cool, I will be closer to startups. I won't be at a startup, but I'll have like a high-level view of what all of them are working on, and maybe I'll find opportunities or problems that I'm passionate about solving. Because for me, it's always been and still is kind of like a journey of figuring out what I'm like so passionate about solving that I'll drop everything else and I'll just do this without any like monetary reward in the back of my mind. Because I believe that like if you provide enough value and you build something valuable, the value will come, and the money will come. So I flew out to Paradigm, did the interview, got the offer. It was an amazing offer. Like I was way over like what I was getting paid before. From like all these different senses, but to me the most important part was like going back to this like startup route, which is what I gravitate towards. It's like being closer to startups. And then I went to the border, and the lawyers told me to get a TN visa for the company because they looked at my LinkedIn profile, and on my LinkedIn it said graduated 2016. But when I created my LinkedIn, I was in school and I put in like expected to graduate.
Right. And
then I never looked back on it because
it was not top of mind.
Never top of mind. And so they were like, hey, you have a degree, right? And I was like, I don't. And they're like, well, it should still be fine because you have this much experience at all these different companies. It'll be okay. And I was like, okay, cool. And I go to my TN visa interview, and they just didn't like that I didn't have a degree. They were like, you want to be a software engineer in the States, you need to have an engineering degree.
Right.
And I was like, well, that's silly. But it's so subjective, and again, there's like all these different border issues, and this was 2022, so this was a bunch of stuff happening, and they didn't let me in. Then they tried to change the job title to be a scientific technologist, which is like a way to, again, it's a role that doesn't require a degree, but you have to have someone that you work with that has a degree that's in the States, fit all the criteria, go to the border. And this is like a border control person told me, they're like, hey, if you change this, if this is a role that you're going with, I would be able to let you through. And I go up to the counter and I see this person that I talked to a few days ago there, and this other person takes my case, and I was like, hey, is it okay if I speak to the person that I already spoke to? And they're like, no, like doesn't matter what they said, now you're dealing with me.
Right. Yeah.
and the guy was like, scientific technologists don't make this much money.
What? That's their
crazy.
issue? Oh my god.
Yeah, they're like, we've never seen this. And I was like, well, it's a VC fund in the crypto industry. We do a lot of research. Like, I didn't feel like I needed to explain that, like, how are you taking what the offer job letter states on it and trumping that as your decision whether or not I'm an adequate person to come and work in the States? That was like pretty devastating.
I can imagine, yeah.
But again, for someone that could look like a failure, but if I were to step back, that like sent me down a path of, okay, well, I can't move to the States. Now I really want to build something here in Canada. And like, it kind of helps with this kind of like big narrative shift where there was a lot of drain that was happening from Canada to the States. Like, people are going there. And for me personally, it's like such a big part of me now to like make sure that something in Canada can be built that's successful. And again, there's examples of that. There's Shopify, there's Sentry, Rootly, all these different companies that have proven to be successful, like being in Canada. And so for me, it's important to be here now and kind of like as a...
So I have a question about that, right? Because a lot of people that we talk to, or at least that I've experienced this in the tech space, they have this perception that Canada, or maybe Toronto in general, is not as risk-taking. That's why companies are having to raise money in the US, because people are willing to put money into risky projects over there. But in terms of the cultural aspect, I feel like one of Canada's strengths, or Toronto's specifically, is the multiculturalism, right? People are here from diverse backgrounds from everywhere, and you can see it in the daily like output from the country as well. But from your perspective, that trade-off, like, do you see Toronto getting there in the near future, like with the risk-taking and this becoming a major hub for growth and for tech companies and like driving innovation, compared to some of the other ones? Like, you were talking about San Francisco is one, New York is one where there's a lot of capital. So do you see that shifting happening?
I'd like to think it's happening. I think there's never been a lack of risk takers in Toronto, in Canada, from the perspective of like taking a bet on an idea that's out there or something innovative and like trying to make it work. Like, we have research facilities, like Waterloo has a bunch of stuff, and I think the risk taking is definitely on the funding side. I think culturally and historically, and again, just by the natures of things happening in one location and that kind of becoming the hub for something. So Silicon Valley being that place where early on there was a lot of stories of people doing innovative things and capital being adjacent to those people. And so there was stories of like the first check being written to Steve Jobs, and that just overnight success on paper, but like years and years of repeatable outcomes happening in the Silicon Valley has positioned it as a place where people strive to come to. On top of that, you put this concept of American dream or whatever. That's what drives people to... It's not a Canadian dream, it's an American dream, right? And for some reason, Canada has always been on, I wouldn't say in the second place, but it hasn't positioned itself as a place where innovation can meet prosperity, and there are people out here willing to get behind you and take some swings and do the same risk taking that they're doing in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I think there is a disconnect right now as well, and something, again, a disconnect what you were talking about earlier, with needing a degree to qualify for like the base level requirement. I think it's a bit archaic in some cases now. It has to be a lot more subjective. Like, investment banking firms start recruiting when students are in their second year, first semester of a 4-year program. The amount of commitment that requires from the student side and the company side, I think there's a massive disconnect there. That should not be the norm here. Yeah. And it's gradually been moving like half a semester further back and back and back. And I'm like, I get it. You have demand on both sides, but like, this is not feasible. Like, in the long term, you're not getting the best out of your workforce, surely.
100%. And people aren't finding out about these opportunities when they're curious about these opportunities. Yeah. Like, as a programmer, you can start building stuff in high school or earlier. Like, you have 11-year-old kids that are now getting job offers.
Dude, that 11-year-old kid won something at the hackathon this past weekend. Crazy. Like,
One of my favorite stories like this is when I think he was like 13 or something. This kid was animating in Lego, and the Spider-Man movie creators saw him, the animated movie, and they made him like create a bit for the second one, and it's in the movie and everything.
Yep.
And I thought that was like one of the best examples. Again, they found him on Twitter, so it's like these niche communities and like being able to showcase your skills and talents, and like, you know, working around the traditional route is working great, I think.
And I think like part of it is because financial systems are archaic, and again, it's very hard to move something that has been set in place for a long time. Like, very off topic, but like my grandma, she lived in the Ukraine her whole life. She never traveled, and when the war started in 2022, she was like, oh, like, I'm not going anywhere, I'm just staying here, because she's like, literally a tree has been planted and has grown its roots into the ground for almost 80 years at that point. And luckily they were able to kind of get her out of the house, and then I went to pick her up in Slovakia, and we brought her here to Canada. And so here's an 80-year-old woman that has never been outside of the country, but has now flown on a plane, has seen Europe, and is now living in Canada, reconnected with my mom, because that's always been a challenge as well, because we like, when we grew up, we lived, it was my grandma, my parents, my brother, and I. So like that kind of like shifted when we moved here, but for them to be able to reconnect again is it's a again, what happened, the reason for that happening is terrible, because the war started and is still ongoing. But for us to be able to look at the positive side of it and be able to reconnect and do that, and things are changing, and I think we see that with financial systems, partially also due to blockchain and crypto technologies. I think like these limitations that you can't invest until you have a bank account, you can't have a bank account until you're 18 or whatever, like it's not the case in crypto. And I've seen things come up where like people are curious about it, because the dynamics of like investing and trading and all that kind of stuff are interesting topics, and kids should be excited about that. Like you should have like whatever digital currency, it doesn't have to be real or not, but like for people to start understanding what interest, what yield, what all these things are, and those are like the core principles of finance, and blockchains enable that. And so you see more people that are like younger that become developers in blockchain space, because it allows them to do the same things that a financial system wouldn't allow them to do.
And I think, like you said, there's probably a culture shift imminent, or is like probably already underway. So everyone we've spoken to is pretty hopeful about the Toronto tech space, and like we're hoping to be following that closely for the near future at least. So now there's a segment we like to do with our guests where we want to get to know you on a personal side as well. And I know we've talked a lot already, but you know, we call it rapid fire questions, but I'm gonna be honest, it is not really rapid fire. Feel free to think about them if you want to, but okay, I'll just start firing. So what is your go-to comfort meal after a long work day?
Anything my fiance makes me.
Oh,
Great
sweet.
answer. Great answer.
Yeah.
But also Loga's Corner.
Okay.
It's Momo's in the area that I live in. So yeah, but first and foremost, if there's food that my fiance made, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Would you rather spend a day coding in a cabin in the woods or building Legos?
Damn, you guys did some research.
We always do.
Where am I building those Legos?
It's up to you. What is the ideal place to be building Legos? Quick sidebar.
Cabin in the woods sounds wonderful.
Okay,
but over building Legos?
Well, so building Legos in the
okay,
woods,
yeah, sure,
or
okay,
coding
sure,
in the
sure.
woods, it honestly depends. Damn. So Lego for me is definitely a huge fan of it. I started during, like, I had Lego when I was a kid, but it was all like big boxes of random things that we got donated to or found somewhere. And during COVID is when I started picking up sets, and I remember building the Porsche 911 Turbo one, and for me Lego was definitely like therapeutic, and again it's just like very adjacent to technology, because you start with nothing and a bunch of like these spare pieces that you put together, and it ends up being this beautiful product. So to me they're both kind of the same, but I'm taking way too long on this question.
No, I think both is a valid answer. Like, if you can't decide,
we make the rules. We just decided there are no. Okay, awesome. What is the most random thing you've ever built just for fun? This doesn't have to be work building. It could just be anything.
Yeah, I mean, the Avengers Tower in Lego, that was a gift for me for Christmas. I built that. That was pretty random. But very early, I remember this was at the first startup that I was at. I used to go to Hacker News every day, and I tried not to because I would get sucked into it for too long. So I built a Slack bot that would send me the front page of Hacker News to Slack, I don't know if it was just very early versions of the Slack API, but I was like, I don't want to go there, but I want them to come to me, and I don't want to be in the Hacker News space because then just open up a new bunch of different tabs. Whereas in Slack you had to click into one and then it opens up in its own window, and so that was random.
Oh yeah, it's actually pretty cool. It's just taking initiative.
Yeah, exactly.
If you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be?
And this is one-on-one.
Could be candlelight. That's up to you.
There's so many different people that come to mind for different reasons. One person, maybe whoever Satoshi is.
That's the guy who created Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
Pseudo-anonymous, so you don't know who it is.
Right.
I don't know if they're dead, alive. I don't know who that person is, but I think I have so many questions from how they came up with the idea and the Bitcoin white paper, why they chose to be pseudo-anonymous, and just kind of what their life is like.
Wow,
great answer.
Mythical
Great
creature
answer.
I had never thought about. Yeah. Okay. What is your guilty pleasure tech gadget or tool that you just can't live without, and you really should be able to?
Probably Twitter.
Yeah, that's a common answer.
Yep.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's one app or tool that you think is totally underrated?
This episode is brought to you by warp.dev. I'm kidding. Underrated app or tool. Man, what doesn't get enough credit? This isn't rapid questions. These are deep, thought-provoking questions.
No, this is the power of editing. When you hear it, it's gonna sound rapid to everybody else. Yeah.
I think I'm gonna say it's not an app and it's not a tool. It's just curiosity.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think people are too quick to act rather than take a step back and be curious.
I'd say it's a pretty good tool in your toolbox. I'd say you
and
can
I guess
define it like
it's
that.
actually a tool.
Yeah.
Okay. If you could instantly master any skill overnight, what would it be?
Storytelling.
Ah, good one.
Yeah.
I think we had a similar answer. I think Josh said marketing, and I think there's an underlying theme that there's something so broad, and you just
Yeah, it's part of the reason for doing this podcast and just being able to put myself in situations where I find that I speak too quickly. That's feedback that I've been getting, and I see this in my dad and myself too, is going on tangents that might not lead anywhere, and then obviously you can hear this in the podcast too probably, but being able to kind of circle it all back in a cohesive story is a powerful tool for whether you're building product or talking to a friend or your significant other. I think so if anyone has any ideas for storytelling hacks or ways to get better at it,
One thing I like to do always, and this is based on advice I was given in an interview one time, was always come back to the question. And so every time I'm writing or I'm trying to tell a story to somebody, I'm someone who likes to go into really minute details, because in my head I'm I want you to be there. I don't want you to just get the gist of it from me.
Yeah.
I need you to experience what happened.
Yes.
And then keeping the question in my head, I ask myself a question in the beginning, what happened here on this day specifically, and I keep trying to tie it back to that, and I think that helps.
Yeah.
Because you're constantly, everything you add to that, if it's not answering it, it already gets filtered out.
Balancing with the time it takes for you to get there, because again, you can go you have to, before you get into these details, understand how long each detail will take, and understand the capacity for the person that you're telling that story to engage with it and actually go along on that journey, right? It's definitely a balance that I'm learning to be better at.
If you could go back and give advice to yourself when you were just starting your tech career, what would it be?
Be patient. I think, again, it is a double-edged sword, because there's been times where I was too quick to act, like switching jobs when I had 6 months left to vest a big portion of my Shopify RSUs. I decided, no, I'm going to go to Coinbase.
If your life was a movie, what would it be titled?
Too early to think about that, because it feels like I'm just starting out.
What would the first installment be titled?
Yeah, I guess this could be a Fast and Furious series franchise, but 20 different series. And funny enough, Patience works with Too Fast, Too Furious. So. Yeah. Be curious, not judgmental.
Nice. Good old Jason Sudeikis.
Shout out, Jason.
Okay, this last question is probably one of the most important questions we ask in this podcast. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Yes.
That was very quick.
Yeah, it was good. It was a good quick.
This is the first rapid question.
Yeah, you're right. That's why we end on that, because it's like a lot of behavioral studies with like either the inception or like the ending of an experience is the most memorable. So the first question and the last question are the actual rapid ones. Everything else in between is the deceitful part.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So with that, thank you for coming on episode 3 of Not a Minimal Viable podcast. For those listening, this is the first episode that we filmed in person at a studio.
So yeah, shout out to CIUT.FM at U of T for this. It's been a great experience, and hopefully the partnership continues. And shout out to Arman Iyad, who is our sound engineer. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And thank you, Sergiy, for being our guest here today. Lovely experience. Hope you enjoyed chatting with us.
Thank you so much. No, this was definitely very exciting. I'm very privileged, and I appreciate all the stuff that you guys do. I'll keep listening to all the future episodes, and now they're going to sound even better.
Exactly.
You can find all of Sergey's links to his Twitter, LinkedIn, website below or in the description. Yeah. Thank you.
Come find me.